Hello, guys, and welcome to the Unashamed Disciple Podcast. I am so glad that you decided to tune into this episode today, and I hope that you are having an excellent day so far. Here on the podcast, we are going over the fruits of the Spirit. We have talked or mentioned about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and now we are going to get into today faithfulness. Now, this is a huge step in our development of this series because our status of if we are a good Christian or if we even are a Christian in God's eyes depends or hinges on the fact that we are faithful to Him, right? Think about Hebrews 10:23. It says, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." And John 14:15, where Jesus says, "If you love me, keep my commandments. Remain faithful to me. Follow my words." That is what God wants us to be, faithful to Him, right? Faithfulness is an extremely important part of our lives. It is so important, in fact, because we know that the devil tempts us and that he wants us to be unfaithful to God and his commandments. 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because our adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." And so, in this episode on the podcast, we will be discussing faithfulness, as I mentioned before, and how to be faithful to God when He asks you to do hard things, or how to be faithful when the devil is tempting you and trying to get you to fall away. We will look at these challenges of faithfulness in this episode, guys, through the life of one man. And that man's name is Abram or Abraham. We will look at his life and how he was faithful to God. And even though he failed at times, he still came back to God. He even was called the friend of God in James chapter 2. Imagine being called the friend of God, guys. He is legit. He is mentioned many times in the Bible for having a great faith. Let's look at the life of Abraham or his example together and find what it means to be faithful to God and to His Word. Turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. We'll actually look at verse 31 of chapter 11 as well. But let's talk about who Abram was. Abram, that was his name at the time, was the son of Terah. Now, Terah and Abram and their families lived in the land of Ur of the Chaldeans. But the Bible says that Terah wanted to go to the land of Canaan. In verse 31 of chapter 11, it says, "And Terah and his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out from them, from Ur of the Chaldeans, to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there." Okay, we see here that Terah didn't finish his journey, right? He wanted to go to the land of Canaan. But what they ended up doing is they settled in the land of Haran, which I would guess is like a stopping point, and they ended up just staying there for the rest of Terah's life. Now, this is important because the Lord makes a promise or covenant with Abram that says he will inherit the land of Canaan. It is also important because look at what it says in Genesis 12 and verse 1 through 3. We see here that God tells Abram to leave his father. Look at verse 1 here. "Now the Lord had said to Abram, 'Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" So we see here not only that God tells Abram to leave his father, leave his family, leave his home, to a land that God will show him. He doesn't even know where he's going. God hasn't given him the details, and yet look at verse 4. Look at what he does in verse 4. Look at Abram's faith here. "So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him." Wow. So the first thing that we see here, guys, is that being faithful sometimes means doing hard things. Abram was told to leave his father's house to a land that he doesn't even know. And there are so many things that could go wrong, right? There are so many possibilities that could happen, and yet he leaves. He goes and departs and does as the Lord told him to. That, my friends, is what true faithfulness to God looks like. Being able to do hard things for your faith, for the Lord. Think about it for you. I want to create this example for you. If God was able to talk to you today, and he says, leave your house, leave Missouri, leave Tennessee, wherever you may be, and go to a land that I will show you. Now, you don't know where you're going. There's no preparation. You just must go. That is what going on. That is what is going on in Abraham's mind, And yet he went. There were so many things that could go wrong. What did this happen? What did this happen? What did this possibility happen? Yet Abraham remained faithful to God and did as he was told. Being faithful to God requires doing hard things. And hopefully you don't have to go somewhere without knowing that place or where you're going or all that stuff. But maybe it just means doing something out of your comfort zone. Sharing the gospel with someone. Maybe showing love to someone. Sharing Jesus with someone. It could be something like that. And that would be considered being faithful to God because you are doing a hard thing. You're showing your faithfulness through your actions. James 2 talks about faith and works, right? You show me my faith. You show me your faith by my works. I will show you my faith by my works, sorry. But it is so important that we do hard things because it proves that we are faithful to God. So that's the first thing we see, right? Abraham was faithful to God because he did hard things. He left his homeland to go to a land that he didn't know. He eventually finds out the land was Canaan, the land that the father wanted to go to in the first place. A whole nother thing, very interesting. You can look at it if you'd like. But the next thing that we see is that being faithful requires trust and patience. Continuing on in Abraham's life, also that God is in control. In Genesis 16, so a couple chapters forward, this is where we find Abram and his wife Sarai. And they are wavering in their faith. And they try to take matters in their own hands. Let me explain. You see, God had promised Abram many descendants, and yet he had no children. And Sarai says, here, have my maid. Maybe our descendants will be through her, which, by the way, was not what God said to do. And this maid ends up having a son named Ishmael, and it creates all this drama or problems between Sarai and her maid. But the point is that, number one, we all fail. This was not God's plan. God's plan was that Abraham would have many descendants through Sarai. And that wasn't happening. They grew impatient. They took matters in their own hands. All this happened. They failed, right? So number one, we all fail. We all sin. And we all sometimes think that we know better than God, right? But in the end, we must and we should do, number two, trust in God and his word. You really can't be faithful to God and his word if you don't trust him, right? And so, yeah, we all fail at times. Abram failed in the situation, but in the next couple of chapters, that all becomes fixed with the help of God. When we fail, we must always return to God and his loving embrace because he knows that we aren't perfect. Romans 3 verse 23 says, all men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. He knows that. He knows that we aren't perfect, and he is so merciful that he forgives us. And because of that, we must trust him. We must be faithful to him and trust that he is in control. Trust that his word is right. Trust that he is a faithful creator. The last thing, too, is in Genesis chapter 22. And it kind of builds off of what we've been talking about, right? So while we're reading this, I want you to look out for the two things that Abraham has learned. Being able to do hard things, showing your faith through your works, and then also trusting in God and his word. being patient with him. And so let's read this. I just want to read this because the story, if we explain it, it might not make sense. So I just want to read this and just see the beauty of this event in Abraham's life. Genesis 22 and verse 1. Now it came to pass, after these things, that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, which, by the way, Sarai conceived and bore Isaac, his son, his descendant, his only son whom he loved very much. He says, Take now your son, in verse 2, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, 2 days later. Right? No. Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Right out of the gate, we see him doing hard things. He is just asked to offer his son whom he loved. The son who he waited so many years for, 25 years to be exact, for. And he's asked to offer him an offering. And what does he do? The next morning he packs up and is willing to go. And he says in verse 4, Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. So they traveled for 3 days. And he lifted his eyes and saw the mountain that God had told him. And Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. Oh, wait a minute. Abraham, you're supposed to offer Isaac. When you offer someone, I don't think you're supposed to go back to the place where you started. Abraham says, we will come back. Man, Abraham had such a great faith. He's learned from his lessons. And so Abraham, verse 6, took the wood and the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And the 2 of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. Then Isaac said, Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the 2 of them went together. Man, another amazing statement from Abraham. He is just proving over and over that he is faithful to God and that he trusts in him. Verse 9, Then they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. That Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. Man, I can't imagine how joyful he was. And Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Oh man, I believe that we can say that Abraham was a faithful man to God. He learned that being faithful requires to do hard things. He left his homeland to a place he didn't know where he was going. And he was willing to offer his son Isaac on a burnt offering to the Lord. That's how faithful he was to him. And he eventually trusted in God and kept his word and was willing to do hard things because of his faith. Abraham was a faithful person to God. I believe that we can say that in full confidence, right? And all I ask is that we are faithful to God the way Abraham was. We should be willing to do hard things and to trust in God if that means that we are faithful to him. And to end this episode, we've looked at the life of Abraham. We see how faithful he was, and even though he stumbled, he came back and trusted in God. I like to circle back to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. I want to see what the Hebrew writer mentions on Abraham. Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the faith chapter, the hall of faith, because the writer of Hebrews just lists over and over people of faith. And, by faith Noah, by faith Abel, by faith, right? It's the faith chapter. And so in verse 8, this is where he mentions Abraham. He says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of the promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac his son and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Abraham had faith. Skipping down to verse 17, I believe. Yep, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. Remember getting Ishmael, but this is the promised son. Concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead. He had faith that even if he would offer his son, that somehow God would raise him up from the dead. Wow, such great faith Abraham had. He was so faithful to God, from which he also received from him in a figurative sense. And then now I want us to look at what Hebrews says to us. He mentions all of these people: Abraham, Noah, Isaac, Jacob, the Israelites, Moses. He goes on and on and on and on and on. And until verse 29 at the end of the chapter, he says, and all these having obtained a good testimony through faith. They all were witnesses of a good faith, but they did not receive the promise. What promise? Well, the promise that someone was coming that would wear the whole world's sins, that would save humanity, a way that would bring God closer to his people through salvation in his blood. That was the promise, right? And they did not receive that. They died before that happened. God, having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Look at verse 12. Chapter 12, though. He says, therefore, because of all this, we also, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, talking about the people he's mentioned, let us lay aside every weight, every burden, and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance. Let us remain faithful to God. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We see in the book of Hebrews that Abraham was a faithful person to God. And the writer says that therefore, since we see all these people, let us run with endurance. Let us remain faithful. We must be a faithful people, because what is our goal? In the end, our goal is to get to heaven. And that cannot happen if we aren't faithful to God. So let us run the race with endurance, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Be a faithful person. Love God, love his commandments, be kind, be good, be peaceful, be loving, be joyful, be patient towards others. Be an unashamed disciple of God, of Christ, and enjoy the benefits of these things. Because if we do these things, we receive the promise that was given to us. God is not slacking toward his promises, but he is a faithful creator. He loves us. He is faithful towards us. And so I really hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode on faithfulness. And I know it's hard to be faithful, guys, especially when the devil tempts us. But I know you can. I know you can get through this. I know that he wants you, and he wants you to love him and to follow his word. And one day, I hope that you realize that because I was faithful, because I did all this, because I got through this trial, I can worship him in heaven. That will be such a great day, my friends. And so God bless everyone. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.